So here's just the topic that I was asked to speak on. I like to recognize the ancestral grounds and homelands that Indiana University was built on. And we do this because I think it's part of maintaining a truth to our history and all of our histories. And so that's why we continue to recognize that, to honor those and not ignore that fact. And so today I'm going to talk about how to make this work personal, the anti-racist agenda. I do believe that we need to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence because that's a precursor to this work. And then we'll talk about specifically IU anti-racist agenda, and we'll talk about how to have difficult conversations and move straight ahead. I'm trying to get this video. There we go. Now I can see you guys. Can you see me? Okay. And then we'll keep moving on that. So Indiana University has made a commitment to denounce racism in all of its forms. It's also to make sure that we help coordinate the resources to equip IU to address systemic racism and the opportunity to further aid IU in building equitable and welcome environments for all of our individuals, from faculty, staff, students, and administrators. Why is this important? This is important specifically because it affects how we see each other, therefore how we treat each other. It affects how we design programs, curriculum, and engage in partnerships with each other in the external. But it also helps to understand history with access to intergenerational wealth and lack thereof as we begin to talk about systemic racism. I think it's important that we have to remember and learn some history as a precursor to doing well in this work. And so in other words, again, it's talking about this truth. Create the urgency of need and helps to devalue and eradicate arrogance, I think, in many cultures, as well as in the academy. I'm asking this to see your perspective and what you think, and how do we begin to really dismantle systems that are biased? And I'm asking this from you as the next generation of policymakers and leaders and lawyers and doctors and physicians and teachers. What solutions do you, I mean, how would you brainstorm with someone about what needs to be done?
Okay, so this may seem a little like too informal, I feel like, but I think the basis of the solution is really just education and having conversations. But I feel like for our generation, those conversations aren't going to happen like formally. Like we don't really watch the news or like really, read the newspaper, stuff like that. And so for me, it seems like really juvenile, but I've honestly learned a lot just from people telling like stories in a quick TikTok video. Like
Ah,
just yesterday, like I watched this video about someone explaining how white people sometimes get offended when that like being black is a culture but being white isn't a culture, and it was just super interesting to learn the history of that. And they talked about how that ties back to slavery and how Africans didn't know what specific African country they came from because of slavery and colonization and stuff like that. And so therefore they black became a culture because there wasn't specific countries that they knew their history of. But for white people, it's like, oh, I'm Irish. I'm like, we know where we came from because we have those ancestors and we know our history. And so I just like a simple video that I came across on TikTok was super informal and I thought it was super interesting. So I feel like just having like informal conversations and like over social media, I think is a great way to start those educational experiences.
okay.
Yeah, I definitely kind of agree with Lauren in the fact that like I think social media and those kind of informal ways are going to be the most accessible to like all everybody, that, because necessarily you're going to cater, someone that has interests in these kind of things is going to cater to look at information towards that things. But in a platform like, I don't know, all social media, everyone's on there. So it kind of just expands to a lot of people rather than a specific group that already kind of maybe cares.
Wow, my brain is going like, it's like so amazing for my generation to hear this, because one of the things I think is, what is truth on social media? Like, Lauren, I love the fact that you shared that, this person who was sharing thought, okay, Black people came from Africa, and because they didn't know what country, so therefore they have this culture thing. But, and so therefore white people don't. And I find that really interesting, because if you go to the Northeast, you would find that people would say, no, I'm Irish American. No, I'm this. And so you find that where you go, different people pull that in. In fact, my spouse really didn't know where he was from, really. He knew that the name was somewhat German. So, but until he did his DNA, did he find out that he was Switzerland, as well as German, as well as other things. And so it's really interesting, this notion of boxes. What is white and how is that defined? And what is Black and how is that defined? And so we have these boxes that in the US, white was never a racial box until the US started it. Because when you go to Europe, they don't have such thing. They may have it maybe now in England, but I'm not sure. But so I think that's really powerful in listening to. I love the fact you said, oh, we don't look at the news. I was raised every day, and maybe Zelia, you were too. I mean, I was raised at 6:30 every night, Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, CBS Evening News. Even today, I sort of like, oh, I got to watch the CBS Evening News. So I do read news on my phone, but I just love this conversation about how you get information. And it's so different. And I think for people who are running organizations, my generation and older, to hear this, I think that would be very surprising to some of them. I think they say, oh yeah, you use social media, but I'm sure they read the New York Times and the Atlanta magazine, and but that's typically, I mean, again, that's misinformation, correct? Wow, I mean, you blew my mind. I so enjoy your contributions. It's always wonderful to hear what your generation is thinking and how you think about things. You don't ponder and realize that the way that we see the world and what has conditioned our vision to the world and ourselves are different. But I think, when do you get this chance to really talk across generations where you feel you're given as much as you're getting? And to me, that is so important, that I stay curious and learn from all generations.